To the DataPlatformGeeks webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Today we have Greg Lowe, world-renowned data platform expert, MVP, and MCM. He will be giving session today on a few tips and tricks how to use SQL Server Management Studio effectively. Before we jump into the webinar, I would like to quickly take you through some slides about DataPlatformGeeks. DataPlatformGeeks is a community initiative and a subsidiary of eDomino Solutions, which has companies like SQLMaestros and Peopleware India, who specialize in training across India as well as online. Please do visit their sites to get more information. The fourth year of the conference, Data Platform Summit, has been announced. This is happening in August from 9th to 11th, the 3-day conference, and there are 2 pre-conference training days on 7th and 8th of August. The venue is Hotel Radisson Blu, which is formerly Hotel Park Plaza in Bangalore. This is a 3-day pure learning event on Microsoft Data Platform, Analytics, and also open source. The 2 pre-conference training days are full-day training on specific topics by world-renowned speakers. We have more than 100 sessions and more than 50 speakers at this conference. This will be your best opportunity to interact with the worldwide experts like MVPs and MCMs, and also the Microsoft product team members who will be flying down directly from Redmond. It's a 100% learning event. Let me quickly introduce you to the core team behind DataPlatformGeeks. Amit Bansal, the founder and president. Myself, I am Manohar Puna, I'm the vice president. Avnish Panchal, Prince Rasogi, Sandeep Pani, and Surabhi Agarwal are the core team members and the pillars behind this community. eDomino Teams helps us run these events across India as well as online. A special thanks and shout out to Microsoft, who has been a great support in building this community and also constantly supporting the conference. About the DataPlatformGeeks community, if you're attending the webinar today, you would have already registered on DPG. If you haven't got time to explore, please do take out some time and explore, because there's a lot of opportunities to learn from free resources that are available on the site. Everything on this site is free, like there are few videos, labs, there are magazines, and also blogs. So you can sharpen your skills and advance your career based on this site. And also join the largest SQL group on Facebook, the SQL Geeks. This is the official Facebook group of DataPlatformGeeks. You can post your questions and you will get answers from experts from all around the world. And also you can start answering questions if you are interested and take out some time to help the community. And also join the LinkedIn group. And I would like to quickly hand over to our speaker today, Mr. Greg Lowe. Over to you, Greg.
So just need to get remote control. Here we go. So share screen. Yep, and we'll grab this one. Cool.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Alrighty, so can see that okay? Great.
Yes.
So listen, thanks for that, Manohar. It's really interesting to get to sort of talk to the group tonight. I really would love to get down across to the summit at some stage. This year I had another chat to Amit before it, and just couldn't manage to sort of fit it in. But I will do that one day coming up. And so listen, anyway, this session is around Management Studio tips and tricks. And what I've been doing over a lot of years is sort of gathering little bits of this over a period of time. And so where I fit in, so I head up a company called SQL Down Under, and I'm mostly doing mentoring sort of work there and a bit of training work here and there. I've been a data platform MVP a long time, I think something up around nearly 20 years now or so, and part of the Microsoft Regional Director Program, which basically just gets me on some sort of interesting mailing lists in Microsoft, and went through the Master's Certification Program and was an instructor in that. And I do a bit of writing. I've written a number of MSTN white papers and a number of tools and things that we have. So look, where this fits in, what I want to cover in a pretty big hurry is some of the things that I find are not particularly well known, but I really want to spend a bit more time highlighting things that have sort of changed in fairly recent times, more so than things that have been around a long time. I'll show you a few of the things that have been around a long time regardless, but I'll sort of try and bias it a bit more towards things a bit more recent. And simply because there's so many things that we could actually talk about, but these are the sections that I want to cover. So it's a bit of a race. And so look, what I'd suggest also, if you want to, after the session, we've got a book I've just literally published yesterday. And so we'll put a link up in the notes or the chat after this, but it's just ssmsbook.sqldownunder.com. That's free. You can now download that. I think Satya was telling me he grabbed that just before the session, and yeah, that's it. So that's now available, and I hope you enjoy it. It's all of those same sections. But let's get in and have a look at this specifically. Now, the first few things I want to sort of talk about, there are a number of things just to do with query editing. So let's actually, let's start here. Actually, I'll just start with a new query window first up. And the first things that usually about dragging objects. And so most people are aware that if you look in here, for example, I can sort of drag out names and so on. That works just fine. And I can drag down things like maybe the name of a table. I can configure whether or not the schema comes out at the same time. Now, notice though that if I pick something that has, let's go down here and find something that's actually got spaces in the names. So if I pull out, say, payment method and pop that out, notice it now automatically goes and puts quotes around the payment method, but it doesn't around the dimension. And so what's happened there, they've made changes on this in recent times, but you can control this behavior. What it used to do is just put square brackets around the entire lot. And so if we look under Tools and Options, these things are down in SQL Server Object Explorer. And if we scroll in here and have a look at scripting, this is where you get to configure the vast majority of things about how those scripts and so on will now appear. And a few commands here we'll come back to later. But the important thing is you can now sort of configure whether or not you want the square brackets there or not. But if you drag out names that do have embedded spaces, it does automatically stick square brackets around it. They don't have it a little more intelligent yet. So for example, if I bring out the word order, right, and pop that out, notice it doesn't put that in square brackets, but we wouldn't be able to use that because it's part of order by in a query. So, so that's an example of a key word that we need to have quoted before we could actually use it. We'd need square brackets, but it doesn't quite understand that yet. Now, those ones have been fairly obvious. The other one that hasn't been fairly obvious to a lot of people are the column names. And so if we look at, say, invoice lines here, we've had the ability to pull out individual ones of those. But one thing that doesn't seem a lot of people realize is you can drag the word columns. And when you do that, you end up then with a list of, here are all of the column names brought out. And that can be really, really helpful when you're trying to just develop a query and avoid writing, select asterisk or whatever. We can sort of drag the things out and then sort of pick off the columns that we want. Now, a couple of things while we've got this out here, I'll just show you a couple of things in terms of basic editing as well. Most people are aware, obviously, of if I go Control H, I can do replace. So I can say, look, everywhere the word description appears, change that to something more interesting, or whatever, and that works fine. But what a lot of people don't get is that copy and replace area is something that has a lot more capabilities than just the idea of being able to replace words and so on. So for example, if I Control H here, you'll notice down here, first up, you've got an option to say, do we actually manage the case there? If we use this one and match that, this second one says, does the whole word have to get matched? So it's not going to be part of a word. But the one that's interesting here is regular expressions. So for example, if I turn that on, then I could say, look, every time you see a comma and let's say a space, what I could do is replace that with a comma and a carriage return and pop that in and then do replace all. And so notice I've turned that into now a sort of a vertical list like that. And that's actually really, really useful. One of the scenarios where I come across this all the time is that I'm a little bit anal about using spaces rather than tabs. That's just a personal preference. In fact, I probably should be the other way around. But anyway, I really like spaces because it helps me line things up better. But I endlessly open up scripts that somebody else has generated. And the problem is they're full of tabs. And so even if I have my system configured, so if I go in here and say, look, tools, options, and in text editor, and for transact SQL, I have my tabs set here so that I insert spaces instead. And I've set my tab size to 4. But the problem is that only affects the stuff that I'm typing. And so if I open up a query from someone else, or even if I script an object from the database and it's already got tabs in there, that actually is a real pain in the neck to me. So again, a good example of that is that if there were tabs in there, I can go /T and say, look, replace that with 4 spaces. And then that would just go in and replace all of the tabs with that, and that would fix that for me straight away. So be aware of the regular expression options inside here. You can do some very, very sophisticated stuff with that. All right. Now, another thing while we're in editing mode, obviously we've had the ability to highlight things. If I double click something, I get that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that I can, if I highlight across this way, what I can do is hold down the Alt key and the Shift key, and then I can grab horizontal sections like this, and then I could type something over the top of it. So I could say this is replacement, and I can do that. Okay. Control Z obviously puts that back the other way. Now, where I use this sort of thing all the time is, for example, if I had something at the beginning of this, let's say I'm trying to turn this into a values clause where I say, look, select Asta from, let's say, values. And what I need is a list of things with quotes around them to be able to sort of create this. So the question is, how do you do that? And so what I can do here is I can put the cursor there, I can arrow down here, and then go quote, and then put that single quote there, right? And then based on what we were doing before, I could highlight this, do Control H, and then say, look, wherever there's a comma, I want to replace that with a quote and close bracket and a comma, and then just replace that, right? And that'll give me those. And so then I can just tidy up this last one and so on. And so that's then given me, something now that works in a completely different way, but it makes it far easier to edit this type of thing, right? And so anyway, I could put an alias on that and so on. We could turn it into a query. But the main thing I want to show you is just how you can go in and edit this stuff. And if you decided that a quote wasn't the right thing here, for example, I can go and pop that down and then go, quote 1, 1, maybe another quote in there or something. So I can just edit those entire sections. So look, the editing those sort of rectangular groups of stuff is again incredibly useful to be able to do that. Now, while we're on working with Object Explorer here, there are another number of other things that are kind of useful in here. So for example, if I look at, let's say, tables, maybe let's see what we've got in the way of indexes down here. Yeah, this is a good example. So what tends to happen is I'll often get a bunch of indexes there, and I'm interested in comparing what's in each of those indexes. Are there things where the indexes are overlapping, or maybe I'm thinking about creating a new one and I'm wondering, can I use an existing one that's there and sort of modify it in some way? Now, what I see people do all the time is they'll come in here and right click and go properties and have a look at what's in that one, and then they'll do the same for the next. Or they'll come in here and say, look, script the index as create to new query window, and then they get 1. But then the question is, like, how do you do this some comparison? So one of the things to be aware of is that whenever you have groups of things inside here in Object Explorer, if I click on the heading and then I click the F7 key, what that'll do is open up Object Explorer. In fact, let me get rid of that one. And so what that's done is it's opened up a list of all of the items that were in that group, right? Now, the nice thing here is that once it's in that state, I can shift and shift click there to select the lot, and I can still do operations like script index as, create to new query window, but the difference is now I get them all in a single window, and it's much, much easier for me to go through and have a look at, how have those things been configured. And so whenever you're working with a whole lot of these definitions, that's often a quicker way to do the work, is having that as part of the Object Explorer details. A few other things in here too. If you had a long list, for example, notice if I click on the name, in fact, I'll deselect these, but once I've clicked on the name there, I can sort. The other thing I can do with that is I've just typed PK, and it's just gone straight to the PK. So if you have a big long list of these things, maybe table names or something, you can use that to then just navigate literally by typing. It's not just one character at a time. If I go, FKS and so on down, it'll slowly work its way down to the one that I want. So it's not like resetting every time you hit a key. Now, the sort of thing where this can be incredibly useful as well is that I can filter inside here. And so I can go through and sort of do a lot of filtering and pick out particular types of things that I want in here. I can set filters. And another one is that if I look at, say, something like the tables list, so maybe I come to the Wide World Importers database. This is the sample, one of the samples that we built for Microsoft for SQL Server 2016. We actually built all these samples. And if I grab this one on tables and hit F7, that'll give me the list of tables here. So I've got the tables and the schemas that they're part of. But I look at this and go, policy health, oh, look, nobody uses that. Create date, look, that might be interesting to be able to hold that inside there. But let's do something a little more interesting. So notice in the heading, I can right click and I can say, look, I actually don't want the policy health, but I would love data space, I would love index space, and I would like maybe the number of rows perhaps in the table. And so now when I go into this, it's going to show me that straight away. And that's a far, far quicker way to get an idea what occupies what space within the database and how many rows are currently inside that. And so this Object Explorer details window, I find, is something that just very, very few people seem to be really comfortable with working with. And yet it's actually one of the most powerful things in the system. All right. Now, another one while we're at it, I often also get asked if there's a way when you have something like one of these tables, is there some way to just, instead of scripting the table, is to script out the data? And so notice if I have, let's say, state provinces here, and if I look at the right-click option, so I've got script table as, and you've got create the table, drop, and so on, and you do have insert, but the problem is that if you do that, what it's doing is scripting you an insert statement that you could write to work with the table. What people often want is to script out insert statements for all the data. And just be aware that is there. It's just a bit clumsy. I really wish it was right here, script and insert for the data. But let me just show you. So the thing you have to do is you don't start there. You start up on the database and then say tasks, and then we go to generate scripts, and next, and then we pick out the object that we want to work with. And so let's say in this case, delivery methods, and next, and then where do we want to do the scripts? Okay, but note there's an advanced button, and this is the trick. And so we need to come in here, and a couple of things that are interesting here when you're generating scripts that, again, people sometimes haven't seen. And so notice you've got an option in here to script for different versions of SQL Server as well. And so that's actually kind of useful because it means it's going to try and avoid scripting out things that don't work in earlier versions. And it's going to avoid you, say, having a 2017 thing that you script and then trying to generate stuff that you're going to be able to run against 2012 or 2014. It's not perfect, but it actually does a pretty good job, that part. But that's not the one. The other one that's interesting here is the ability to do it for different editions as well. So that's not going to script things that are only available in a certain edition. And you've also got the ability here is whether this is a standalone instance or an Azure SQL database. So all of those can be useful depending upon what you're trying to script. But the one that's of interest to us here is this guy here. So where it's types of data to script. And so the option that we're looking for here is that we have an option for data only, schema and data, and schema only. So in this case, let's just take data only. And okay, and I'll just pop that to a new query window and run next. And done. And so notice that's then scripted this. And all our data is sort of scripted in here. Some of the stuff about how that's scripted, I must admit, isn't my favorite thing. So notice what they've done here with the date time 2, for example. They've actually taken the date time value as a string, and then they've said, look, cast that as date time 2. But they've done the full date time format with the T, the ISO 8601T format with the T and everything there. So they want to do that so that in the script, it doesn't accidentally get truncated, turned into a different type before it gets inserted into the column. And so anyway, they've done that, but it does make some of those scripts kind of long, in terms of being able to read them. The other thing they do is they do script all the column names, which is great. And normally I would always want that, except sometimes when you're dealing with really large tables where the format of that doesn't change, you could easily end up with half the script being something that isn't what you want, right? Because it'll just be full of the same stuff all the time. And it'd be interesting to start playing around with how could I then turn this into a different sort of insert statement. Notice they've also done this in terms of different batches as well. So what's going to happen when you run this is it's going to run off. And if you look at the concept of a SQL script, so this whole thing is a script, and this is obviously a statement, and then the go is a batch separator. Let me pop that out. So if I just did that, what would happen when I just say execute? What SQL Server Management Studio would do is it would send that to the database engine. I wish they stuck semicolons on the end of that, but anyway. And then what it would do is pick up the next go, find the statement. So it would then grab those two statements, send those to the database engine, wait for it to return. Then it would send this one to the database engine and wait for it to return, so on. And there'd be an awful lot of round trips going on there to the server. Now, that may or may not be the action you want, but that can significantly slow down the inserts. Now, you can't have batches that are too crazy large, but you might want to cut down the number of batches in there, or even maybe chop up the script a bit or something like that. Now, an important thing about scripts to keep in mind too is that the word go is actually not a T-SQL word. A lot of people don't understand that. Go is actually just a batch separator, and the only thing it has meaning to are the tools that you use with SQL Server. So for example, I have a Star Trek mate, and what he does is he'd come in here and let's say transact SQL. Let's have a look at query execution in SQL Server. Notice that this is actually a configurable word, right? And so, he's a Star Trek fan, so he could say, look, engage, there, and then he could go through and change all his scripts so that everywhere it says go, and let's say a carriage return. Let's put that on there. You could say, look, I'm going to change that to engage and a carriage return, and you look at that and go, whoa, what's that? Now, notice the IntelliSense doesn't have a clue what you're talking about. But if I say, look, parse this, it's having a bit of a whinge about this. But the thing is, if you actually built this into scripts and stuff, you can actually get this to run perfectly fine. But this would be in another script window, no doubt. So if I open up, it depends when they read that. But notice it doesn't squiggle now in this one. And looks and goes, yeah, that's no problem. You can say engage all you want. And so anyway, so it's when you open a new query window that it picks up that value. Anyway, so let me go back and put that back before I drive myself crazy. So his scripts are obviously not very useful for anybody else either. So anyway, all good. So listen, anyway, once you're doing this, so this is a way of creating scripts that generate insert scripts for all this stuff. Now, another couple of things I want to show you while we're in here is that if you're looking to maybe make some change to a table or something and wondering what are the things that are related to that table in any way, then what we used to have in earlier versions of SQL Server, it's still there, but there was an SPDepends stored procedure, SP_DEPENDS. Now, the thing is, anybody who worked with that in earlier versions, well, they didn't really find it very useful. And I suppose the most common comment I heard about it is people said, oh, actually it lies. And it wasn't so much it lies, but the problem with it is it didn't understand partial dependencies. So for example, if I come into, let's do this in TempDB. So if I come in here and say, look, create proc Greg test, and in fact, I always try and be anal and again and make it two-part names. But anyway, so if I say, look, as begin, and in here I said something like select Asta from dog, which doesn't exist, then notice that it'll let me happily create that stored procedure, even though this thing doesn't exist at all. And this is because SQL Server as a whole is checking the syntax, right? So if I said select from DBO dog, highlight that and just say, look, can you parse that for me? It goes, yeah, no problem, that's fine. But clearly it wouldn't let me run that because there's no such thing. But the same thing applies to things like procedures. So I can build a procedure that references an object, but the object doesn't yet exist. And so this is one of the reasons why you can create things in all sorts of different orders in SQL Server. You don't have to have the tables there before you create the procedures and so on. Now, the thing that's sort of weird about this is that notice if I said select breed from DBO dog, then it goes, yeah, no, that's okay too. But what would happen is if I said, look, grab breed from, let's say, wide world importers .dbo.dog, and let's actually change this dog to, actually, let's make it application cities. Then notice, clearly there is no such column, but notice that if I say parse this, that's still kind of okay, even though this doesn't exist. But what you'll find often with procs is you go to create something, and if it doesn't find the column there, and the table does exist, then it whinges. But if the table doesn't exist, it doesn't complain at all, because it just thinks this is something you're going to create later. And so the problem is that later when you come in and say create table dog, what it used to do is the dependencies would get tracked from that point on, and it wouldn't know that this thing here was actually dependent on that, right? And so whereas if you created it in the other order, it would know that. And so this is part of the reason why people really came to sort of dislike SPDepends, because they thought it just never seems to tell the truth. So anyway, what they did in SQL Server 2012 is they added a number of dependency views, and these understand partial dependencies. So even if you create stuff like this where it references a thing that doesn't exist, it knows that that's the case. Now, what's really good in here in Management Studio is they've given you access to those same views. So if I come in here and let's say get, let's say delivery methods, and right click, there's view dependencies. And if we look at dependencies, then it shows it to us two ways. So first up, it says, look, objects that depend on this. And so the customers table depends on that. And through that, things like the add customers stored proc and so on, these things depend on that. So this will give you a list of, if I need to change it, what are the things that I need to go and check? And alternately, here are the objects that depend on the thing that we're actually looking at. And again, the people table, and this is what the ones that this thing depends upon. So we know in this case here that this has got a sequence bound dependency, schema bound one down here, which is of type sequence. And so what that's showing us is that delivery method ID, this thing here, is a column in that table, but it's using a sequence to set the new values. You can see that down here. And so what it's trying to say is that this thing is dependent upon that sequence. And also the people table, this is dependent on as well. And this is because in the delivery methods table, there's a column in there saying who last modified the delivery method. And so it's got a reference, foreign key reference to people. And through that, that's then got another sequence, the person ID. And so there's a dependency on the person ID sequence as well. But this is really, really nice, the way this works. And so if we look now at things like, let's say a stored procedure, we've got a whole bunch of them inside here, but let's pick this and look at the dependencies for that. And then what this is telling me, objects it depends on, nothing much, and things that depend on it, there's a few things here. Oh, sorry, on which it depends, sorry, a few things here. So it uses the order list table, it uses the order line list table, and, this one here, this order list, actually is a table valued function, a user-defined table type. And this one here is a user-defined table type. This is a table, this guy here, and this is a function that makes use of that as well. And so this thing here has a dependency on all of these things. And so anyway, look, just be aware that those dependencies are there, and you can also pick them all up both through views, and there are dynamic management views as well that show you those dependencies. But it's really good that they've been added inside here. One other thing with this is that if I look at, let's say, the database, and we go down here and look at reports, notice there's a bunch of standard reports here. I found people don't tend to have spent a lot of time having a look inside here. This stuff is really, really interesting, some of the ones, and they've gone to a lot of trouble to build some of these reports. But sometimes you want reports that are just not part of this. Now, notice there's another one listed down the bottom here, and you look and go, what's that? And so what this is a custom report that I'd created. And the idea is you can tie that to objects here inside Object Explorer. So notice that it knows that I right-clicked on that particular database and so on. And so it's then, I've got stuff in here that drills inside that and turn that into a sort of a custom report. The other thing I could do in here, for example, I could say, look, reports and then custom reports. And if we dive in here, let me have a look. So demo 2017. And here, here's an example. I've got a databases report. And so you then get a warning. You're about to run a custom report. They're worried that you could have a Trojan report, something that, because you're going to run this code. So they're a bit worried about whether you really know where it came from. So I'll say, look, yeah, don't worry about that. And run. And so now this is my own little database report that I've dropped in here. And so anyway, so that's another basic one. And so what will happen then, when I right-click on an object of the same type, it's saying here, you've run the standard report, disk usage, but you've also run this other one, and that'll just actually become a report that you can then run normally inside that. Now, building that is just a standard reporting services report, but it's got a series of parameters that are passed in that are basically telling you things like, what's the server, what is the database context, who's the user, things like that, and the name of the object and so on. But feel free to sort of go in there and look at building those, because they're just standard reports that you can build. Okay, now in terms of appearance, few little things I want to sort of point out. The first is that as I get older, some of the writing on some of these things is getting smaller and smaller, but also I tend to do a number of presentations, and so I don't want lots of writing to be too small. Now, we've had the ability for a long, long time to go in there in, let's have a look, in environment and fonts and colors, to come in here and change the text editor and so on and so on. Most people know that, and that's fine. I tend to set selected text to that because it's a little easier to work with. But a thing that's changed a little while back is they added the ability in here to go in and modify the ones for the environment. And when you first do this, it normally just has a thing saying default, and then you'll find you can't change the size. But what you need to do is go in and pick a specific font, and then you can go and change this to a different size. And this changes the size of, all of these sorts of things, and the names up here and so on, and names in these sort of areas. And so the idea is you can get and change those so that they're actually a bit bigger. So if you're working with like a crazy high resolution screen, it's really, really nice now to be able to change that. And that's incredibly useful. Also, while we're on that sort of stuff, they did add a presentation mode a little while ago. Now, see this little guy up here? This is the quick launch bar. And this one here is, see, notice it has in here the thing that I searched for, like a find and replace before. That one's actually the find box, and that one is the one where you can do find me this thing. This thing here, and that's in your code, this thing here is really interesting. What it does is it searches for things inside Management Studio itself. And so it'll find the underlying Visual Studio things or Management Studio things. So if I go in here and just type font, what it'll do is it'll show me things that are something to do with font. And so if you can't remember when you go into tools, options and things, where on earth is that option? The cool thing here is you can type this in and it'll started changing anything when I first installed it. And there's no way known to man that I want to go back to there. So the only option you have, if you really want to use Present On at the moment, is to go in there and save a set of settings. You can export your settings and then you can bring them back in again. And so that's a bit better. But if you're doing that, you may as well have a saved set of presentation fonts and just bring them in anyway. Another thing that I often do instead of that is nowadays, if I'm running on Windows 10, you can have different users and or different screens and stuff. And so what I could do is change to a demo user and have that other user have different DPI settings for the screen, different fonts in here and stuff, and all of that configured on a per user basis. Then the only thing I'd need to do is change to log on as a different user on my machine, and then I'd have it all set up the way I want. And bonus points on that is that's automatically going to turn off notifications for, Skype and emails and things like that aren't going to pop up the entire time because I'd then be using a different user who doesn't have that stuff. But anyway, this is a really neat little box, being able to type in here and have it sort of find anything that might be of interest anywhere inside the tooling. All right. Now, another one while we're in here is you'll find if you get, let's grab a reasonable size script. Let's get a simulation or something. Now, if I come in here and start modifying things, like let's say I've changed that and then, I don't know, remove T, and then I've got like syntax errors here, and I might, let's say, get rid of something, so there's a bit of an error going on down here and so on. Now, these all appear in the thing, just in the query window, but where they normally also appear is over here. So if I right-click here, scroll bar options, what it's got in here, it normally shows these things. And so the changes, the marks, the errors, the caret positions on. And so what this does is it tries to give you an indication of, see, notice here where the syntax errors are in different sections, or if I've gone in here and sort of just modified a bunch of things as well, it's trying to sort of show me that sort of thing as well. And the problem I find with this is even now, see, if I look over to that to the right, I can barely see where that caret is, right? And so I start to find it really, really hard to find this, particularly once you start getting a whole lot of sort of different colors and things that are coming up on the side there. Now, there are different colors for different things. So if it's red, it's telling you there's a syntax error in that part of the code. The little blue line tells you where the cursor is. A yellow is indicating a change that you've made that you haven't saved yet. And green is telling you about changes that you've made that you have saved. There's a maroon as well. We'll tell you where marks are. So, for example, if I come in here and set a breakpoint, then if I have that option on, what it will do is show me where that mark is as well. And there's also an option to get bookmarks and breakpoints and stuff appearing. But anyway, what I do find is I find this gets really, really cluttered in this. And in something like Visual Studio, that might have been okay, but I do find that this is really, really quite awkward for me. And so what I've often do is I come in here and scroll bar options and turn that off. But while I'm in here, I just want to show you another one as well, in that there's also this behavior. And so this is bar mode or map mode. And so notice if I turn this to map mode, and we'll leave that there with source. And so notice this goes really wide over on the right. And what that's doing now is it's giving me a sort of a map of the different parts of the code. And notice that as I hover over it, it sort of shows me, so it gives me a map, but then it allows me to hover in and look at that particular spot, find the thing I'm interested in, without having to have the biggest magnifying glass in the world, and then just click on that. So that allows me to sort of drill in and find that. I generally don't find that all that brilliant to have all the time. So I tend to have that in bar mode, and I tend to have those things turned off. I kind of like the lack of clutter, but I can see an appeal why some people might like to have those on. Now, another thing I want to show you is that notice up here, I've also got a different undo and redo button that I've set in here. And so notice if I click on this, this actually shows me all the changes that I have been making in the script as I've been going along. Now, that's not normally there. And so Visual Studio has that, but it's just not been there normally enabled in Management Studio. So the idea is you need to just simply come in here and start customizing, and then go in and find the commands, and then work out which sections of this you want, and then basically just enable, I think from memory it's in edit, but anyway, let's have a look at, anyway, I won't go in and drill in and find it at the moment, but the thing I'm getting at is the multi-level undo and redo are commands that are in there. And so you can then go look, add or delete command, and then you can sort of find the thing, which is the thing that's of interest, and then scroll down, and then there'll be a multi something or other in here somewhere. Yeah, multi-level redo and undo are ones that are sitting inside there. So you can just add those and drop them into a certain point on the toolbar. Highly encourage you to do that, because this is a world of goodness where you can go back and undo to a certain point. And then once you've done that, you can then come in and sort of redo to a certain point. We've got that in Visual Studio. And one of the things I often tell people is people underestimate how important that sort of thing is. I did sessions all around the world on what's new in SQL Server 2012. And out of all the things that were added to the product in 2012, the thing that every time I presented it, the room would just go, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, was the fact that undo now actually worked in the Integration Services Designer. I think the product group doesn't understand how much people value that sort of thing. The problem is you're never going to see that on a marketing brochure. It's not going to say undo now actually works, but it's super, super important that these things now actually work. A couple of others while we're in here, a couple of things with zooming and so on. Let me grab a query plan that's, in fact, let me open up a project. And so it's another thing I find people don't tend to use much are projects, but I do like this for keeping scripts and things intact. And the beauty of this as well is that I can have things in here, even like text files and so on, because this basically is kind of like Visual Studio. And you can't just go right click here. Notice there's no add script file or something like that. But if you go up here and say add existing item, you can bring in, it defaults to just wanting SQL scripts, but you can bring other things in as well, including things like deadlock graphs and so on. And what you can do is bring those in, and what it will do, it'll actually pop them in down the bottom here if they're not queries. But the So this is quite nice having this sort of thing. One thing I do want to show you though is that let's get a more complicated script here. Let's go something. This has got a more complicated query plan. So let's actually just, I've got one here just called AdventureWorks, not 2008. I'll just get rid of that. And this query plan, now notice if I grab this and say, show me the query plan for this, this is sort of rattled off over the side, and it gets really, really difficult to go off and look at this. Look, the Plan Explorer, guys, that's really, really good to add that into Management Studio, if that's an option for you. But the other thing you can do, while you can sort of try and navigate here, there are zoom options like zoom to fit and so on, that would be unreadable. But one of the least discoverable bits of UI I find in here is that down in this corner, there's a little plus sign. And if you click on that and hold it, this allows you to sort of drive around inside the query plan. And so that allows you to see, big complicated areas and thick lines and stuff, and allows you to position quite nicely inside that. Alrighty. Now I've got just, I think, a couple of minutes. So a few more things that I will show you sort of while we're at it. One is when you go and make a new connection, so let's say a database engine query here, a couple of things that you can do. So sometimes you might want to have additional things added to a connection string while you're making a connection. So just be aware that in here, there's also an additional connection parameters. So if you, for example, had a multi-subnet availability group, you can do things like say multi-subnet failover is true and so on. So I can actually put additional parameters that would become part of my connection string right in here. Now, the other thing that's nice with this is if you don't like some of the defaults they've used, if you put something in here, it would override any of the ones that are normally provided by SQL Server Management Studio when you do that. Another thought while we're here is that when you make a connection, it's also possible to say, look, people often understand you can use a custom color. So I can say, look, a connection to this one's going to be orange, and maybe this is my something production server or something. So this allows me to have a way of saying, when I connect to this thing, that's actually going to have a different color at the bottom to the other ones. So the ability to set that color is actually kind of cool. I do like that. And we can, again, that's pretty easy to turn off as well. Now, where that's useful as well is that if I go in and configure a set of servers, so let's say here, view registered servers, and what I can do inside here is create a server group. And so I could say these are my development servers, okay? And let's add a server here. So this will be SDU prod, and it doesn't have to have the same name either. I could say this is the HR server or something. And then I can put another server registration in there. Let's go, actually it's partners, another one here. Let's call that the payroll server and so on. This allows me to build groups of servers up in here, but they're stored locally on my machine, and they can be Windows authentication or SQL authentication. You can also have a central repository for those, but they're only Windows authentication. But what's nice here with these groups is that you can do things to the group. So for example, if I right click, notice I can go new query, and then I actually get a multi machine query. So I've got sort of connected to 2 out of 2, and then down over here, you'll see that it's actually connected to the group name instead. And so if I execute a query, let's just say at server name, and run that, that'll actually execute it against both servers and then return back a single result set here. Now, that's just a Management Studio trick. It's actually connecting to each under the covers, it's running those queries, and then it's just assembling that into one set of output. You can change how that works. It's just done that for convenience. But if you look at query results, SQL Server, and then multi-server results, there's options in here to say, look, do you want the login you used in each row as well as a column? the server was there. We had that as a default, but you could also say false, and then what it would do instead is return back separate sets of data for each one. So anyway, so this is kind of nice, and it's not brilliant. If you're dealing with a huge number of servers, you usually want something more complicated, right? Because you'd want something that knows which servers were up and which ones were down, and which ones the commands have been executed against, and so on. But if you know all the servers are up and you've got them in a group, this is a really, really easy way to just go and run a whole lot of stuff against that. In addition, if you have policies and things set up, you can also evaluate policies against a group of servers. So let's just get rid of that server group. And now, is there one more that I want to show? The last thing I want to show you too that often seems to be misunderstood. If I said this, and then I can't remember something about len, notice that if I double click that and hit F1, that'll by default take me straight to the page of content for that. Now, I normally search for these commands by just going command and then T-SQL, and that usually, like if I go here and say len T-SQL, that's always the first result that comes up anyway. Something to be aware that you can do now is if you read this and you think, that isn't right, like I was reading this one yesterday and I noticed down in here, it says, hey, you can do this on the AdventureWorks 2012 database. But that's in every version of AdventureWorks. So there's no reason why that needs to be 2012. What you can do if you look at something here and you don't agree with it or don't like it, is you can change it. And so notice up here, there's little icons here with people, and these are the people who've contributed to this page so far. If I click edit, what that'll do is open it in GitHub. So Microsoft's picked the documentation up and now put it in GitHub. And then what you can do is you can't go and change this directly because you don't have write permission. But if I do a fork on that, then what I can do is get my own copy. I can then go in here and make changes to this and then propose a file change and then click. It'll check whether it could be merged, and it gives me an option to just click and do a pull request. That'll go straight to the person responsible for the page. And what you'll find is that they'll then come back and either merge your change in or usually send you an email as to why they're not going to if they don't like it. The other thing you might get is if you wrote a lot of stuff in here or a big code sample, you might get an email from them saying, look, you're going to have to agree that, it's okay to have the community own this, not just you. And look, there's so much stuff I want to talk about, but anyway, that's kind of where we'll get to for now. As I said, there are nearly a couple of hundred pages of these things inside the book now. So ssmsbook.sqldownunder.com. That's free. I really hope you enjoy it. And look, if you want to get in touch with me, so just greg@sqldownunder.com or greg@greglow.com, really either one there. Website there, I've got the ebook thing. There's an email address just for ideas in relation to the book or suggested changes and things like that. So just ssmsbook@sqldownunder.com. And I think that's pretty close to time, Manaha. So how are we doing?
We are doing pretty good. All right, so if you have any questions, please do pop your questions in the Q&A panel. And while you do that, I'll quickly walk you through a few of the pre-con trainings that are available at Data Platform Summit. I'm gonna share the screen. Yep. All right. So the pre-conference trainings are full-day trainings on a particular topic. It's a 8-hour class. So that will be on 7th and 8th of August. So on 7th of August, we have Troubleshoot and Optimize SQL Server like a pro with by Dimitri Kotkovich. He's a Microsoft certified master from US. We have the second pre-con training on how to migrate your on-premise database to Azure SQLDB as well as managed instance by Sunil Agarwal, a very reputed speaker. And
Sunil's absolutely awesome, old friend, wonderful to go and listen to.
Yeah, he has been a star speaker, rock star speaker at previous conferences for us. So he's coming back this year and doing a full day training as well. We have Rezarat, a BI expert from New Zealand and also a data platform MVP. He's doing a full day training on Power BI from rookie to rockstar. Dr. Leila Atati, a data scientist and also a data platform. I always say it wrong. She's an AI MVP from New Zealand, and she's doing a full day training on 7th of August on leading edge data science with Microsoft tools. Andy Leonard, who's a world-renowned SSIS expert, he'll be doing a full day training on how to build intelligent data integration with SSIS integration services as well as Azure Data Factory. And the sixth one on day one is Cosmos DB workshop, a full day workshop by Madan Gajendran and his team from Microsoft, who will be doing a full day training on the Cosmos DB. The second day, that's 8th of August, we have building intelligence applications using the Microsoft AI platform, again by Dr. Leila Atati. If you're really serious about R, this is the session for you because Steph Locke, a world-renowned R expert, a data science expert, as well as an MVP from UK, she'll be doing a practical R for everyone. Sanjay Mishra and his team, the DataCat team, is coming back to this conference this year. They'll be doing a full day training on how to build a scalable data architecture in Azure. Joey and Denny are coming back again for the 4th time in a row. Joey is doing a full day training on Linux for SQL Server DBAs. Peter Myers, who has been a very popular speaker, is doing a full day training again on 0-2 analysis services. Denny, he'll be doing a full day training on high availability and disaster recovery both on-premise and Azure. For more information on the pre-cons as well as the conference, visit dps10.com. That's the official site, and you can also email us if you want help with talking to your manager or your company, or need some more information. Please do mail us at contact@dps10.com, or you can reach us directly on the phone numbers here. This session is also recorded, so you can go back and listen to the wonderful session by Greg. And if you have any questions, I see a few questions here, but if you don't have enough time to answer all the questions, we can take more questions on our Facebook group as well. Over to you, Greg, for answering the questions.
Actually, I can't see any in the panel here. So.
There's a Q&A panel?
Yeah, I can see the chat. Oh, there's a separate Q&A panel, is there?
Yes. Yep.
Let's have a there we go. Cool. Let's have a look. Are there any analogs of SSMS on Linux? No. Well, sort of. Okay, so what they've now got is there's a new thing called SQL Server Operations Studio, and what that is that's a new cross-platform tool that's built over the top of VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which is again cross-platform. Look, it's still pretty early days for it, but one of the things that's really awesome about SQL Server Operations Studio is that they've also all the code is published up in GitHub, and you can contribute to the development of it and so on. And one of the beautiful things about that is if you need to learn how to do things, some of the code that's up there inside that is amazing to get to have a look at how things are done. But don't just be a stalker or a reader. Get in there and look at contributing and trying to make the product better. But that does run across on, happily run on your Mac, Linux, and so on without a problem. How to compare Management Studio, Visual Studio Database Project? Look, it's really a different target of what you're trying to do. With Visual Studio Database Projects, it's saying, look, I want to build out my database, have a whole lot of like scripts for individual objects, and I want to store the current state of what I want the database to look like. Where you see when people are doing development, there's two ways they usually do it. One is that they'll have some older database, and then they'll have maybe a seed script to start off the database, and then they'll have a database script there for every single change they've ever made to it, and every now and then they might make another new seed one. The problem with that is that works really, really well on small things, but there's a couple of basic problems. One is there's nothing where you can have a look at what is the thing meant to look like, because you've literally got to build one and run it all the way forward before you can see that. And the other problem I come across on very large systems is it becomes an incredibly nasty way to do deployments. So for example, if someone hasn't done deployments for a while, then they'll do things like add a column, add an index, drop the index later, add the index with another column, maybe drop it sometime later, change the table, add the index, and this could all be in a single deployment. Now, that's okay if it's tiny, but the thing is, if you're talking about tables that are terabytes or even hundreds of gigabytes in size, the problem is creating indexes and then dropping them again, and then creating them a bit differently and dropping them again and so on. That is a nightmare, if you're doing that. And the difference is that instead of going straight from where your project is now to where you want to be, the route that you might have to go through to get it to there, that could be the difference between maybe a half-hour deployment and an entire weekend deployment. Could be the sort of thing that happens there. This is one of the things, my favorite tool there, I've got to say, for the Redgate guys, is the SQL Compare tool. Out of all the different tools I've used for trying to do that, I actually tend to use it. So one of the things I quite like doing is building a database project in Visual Studio in the latest versions of that. The VS 2017 ones are quite good. And if you build out a database project in that, while it does have schema compare and a few of those things in there, it's not in a really, really convenient form. I find the options in SQL Compare from the Redgate guys really, really good to use. And then what you can do with that is pick up the changes and then push them out with I know Manahar's done some work with, say, Bamboo, or it doesn't have to be Bamboo, it could be VSTS, could be other things. But you could be then using the DLM tools from Redgate or someone and literally pick up and push out and deploy those changes. Now, you've got to be careful about how you do that in terms of what goes in maybe data fixes and what goes in pre and post deployment scripts. There is work in that. But look, if you want to play around with the options for that, including the new Ready Roll stuff that's in Visual Studio, one of the things is up on the EDX site, you'll find that there's a database DevOps class up there. It only take you maybe about 8 to 12 hours or something to go through that. It's one that Steve Jones from Redgate and I put together, and that one's up there. It's one of the Microsoft courses up there, but it's called Database DevOps. It's part of the Microsoft Professional Certificate in DevOps, and it's just one of the subjects for that. But it walks you through doing both migration-based deployments using Ready Roll or other options, and or doing schema compare style things. At the time, we didn't have good deployment options for VSTS for migration-based deployments. But nonetheless, look, I think if you went through that, that would answer an enormous number of questions for you.
All right. Thank you, Greg, for taking out your time and giving a wonderful session today. And thanks, everyone, for taking your time and attending the session today. Have a great day, everyone. I
hope your conference and pre-cons go well. That is an amazing lineup of people you've got coming there. That's really something. I'm so sad I won't be there, but enjoy.
Thanks, Greg. And we hope to have you one of these years next year.
You will. No problem.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Thank you.